Way before I knew Michael. I just knew Michael was a person. I didn't know him at all. But, Shannon used to be our life team. She used to be over all of our United. I don't know. Anyway, she did a lot of stuff at St. Lawrence, and I love her, and here she is.
That's good. Your daughter did that. My children broke my Can you all hear me just fine?
Yeah.
I did my phone. Everybody used to be quiet. So, anyways, I'm going to start in prayer, if that's all right with y'all. And I just want to say thanks to Eric Kaner for letting me borrow the Bible, because like a good Catholic, I've got mine. So, it's good. All right, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. This is a reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Ephesians. Be subject to one another out of reverence for Christ. Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. As the church is subject to Christ, so that wives also be subject to everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. Even so, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever hates his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So, Michael started talking, I don't know if you can tell the progression here, but last night we talked a lot about finding your source of life, right? And that your source of life should be founded in whom? God. In who? God. That's right. Uh-oh, we okay? Food in there. So we should find our source of life in God, right? And then he talked this morning about how God works within yourself and what you need to do within yourself, so that you can, for your family, for you, move on in life. And now I want to talk specifically about spouses, okay? And how the name of this talk is how to stay in love, basically, okay? So I'm going to do a little demonstration here, and it's good. Kind of go off on a little tangent, but then I'm going to rein it in, okay? At least that's my hope, okay? When I was younger, I didn't have any kids. I had more of a brain, and so now I just get what you get, right? Okay, so that's what we're good for. Okay, so this is my love jug. Okay, this is me. We do green because we are big fans of the Hulk in our house. We smash a lot of things. No, I'm just kidding. Like that comedian, he smashes bottles or whatever. Anyways, so this is my love jug. This is me. And this is me at the beginning of every day, right? So every morning I wake up, right, refreshed, theoretically, right? Some days more than others, not necessarily this morning. Styrofoam mattresses are awesome. There's lots to offer up for. So anyways, this is, and usually the first person I see in the morning is my husband. So this glass, this lovely Santos pint glass, represents my husband. He loves himself a good beer. So every morning I wake up and I just start pouring my love into my husband, right? He's my beloved. He's the one that I believe full-heartedly. I believed it first. He came later. He was the one for me. It took a little convincing. And it made it work, okay? That's a story for another day. But so I pour a lot of myself into him because I love him, right? He's my other half. He's the father of our children. He's the provider of our family. He's amazing to me. So I give a lot of myself to him because I want to. I love to. It's just that it's not a chore for, well, sometimes it's a chore, but, for the most part, it's not a chore to love him, okay? And then these glasses represent my children, okay? We have Kateri here. She's hiding over there. Okay, she's definitely a princess. And we have Cecilia, who's more of the Hulk than a princess. And she likes bad guys. So Hulk sometimes is not the nicest, but whatever. And then we have Noah here. Okay, so I give a lot to my kids every single day because they're young and I need to do that, right? But again, it's not a chore. As a kid, I couldn't wait to be a mom, right? Every boy I ever dated, in my mind, I'm like, could you be the father of my children? Right? I didn't say that because I'm not crazy and I wanted them to stick around, so. But in my mind, that's what it was. I just felt like that's what I was made to do. I wanted to mother. And so if I wasn't going to mother my own children, watch out because I was going to mother whoever came through our door, Animals, kids, people, adults, people don't want to be loved, I was going to love you anyway, okay? So that's just how I felt I was going to be. So I love pouring myself into my kids because they're the answer to my prayer. They are why I was created. I know it. I believe it full-heartedly, okay? This represents my parents. My parents are great people. They live in St. Louis, otherwise known as Utopia. I wish it was a little closer, but I love my parents. I love everything that they taught me. I feel very blessed that I have the parents that I do because they're still together. They're still grossly in love. There's 7 kids, and it's just because my parents really like each other. That's why people are like, oh, did you plan on having 7 kids? And they said no, but it happens. And so I'm glad for that, though. When I was younger, I wanted to vomit, and now I want to vomit. Also, I'm just really happy that that's the witness that I have, okay? This represents my siblings, okay? Sometimes my siblings take a whole lot out of me. Just fill that right up there, but not because they're bad people, but just because, family drama, siblings, so-and-so's mad at so-and-so, and so-and-so, but, whatever. We're a family at the end of the day. We love each other, but I'm pouring a lot of myself out for them. And these represent, if you work, okay, I don't work anymore, but when I did work, I poured some of myself into work. Why he's not here right now, right? Safe place, confidentiality. These are friends. I love my friends. I feel very blessed to have some of the friends that I do. And then this represents all those people who think I'm their friend, but really, I see them, and I'm like, oh, my Lanta. By the time I'm done with them, I'm on E, I'm on empty, And so sometimes this all happens in a day, sometimes not always in a day. But at the end of the day, I can feel pretty empty, right? Sometimes this is noon, right? Sometimes we've hit lunch, and I'm like, dear Lord in heaven, how am I going to finish out the rest of the day? And then poor Michael will come home at 5 o'clock for, dinner and stuff, and I'm like, whoa! God bless him for having to put up with it, but I do love him first, so that it helps. But anyways, but the whole point of this demonstration is to show, literally, how much of yourself you can give out in a day, right? Or in a half a day, or sometimes, it's barely breakfast, right? It's like mass. Sunday, I always feel like Sundays, you barely get to here, right? You're everyone just gets a spit because that's all you have because you're just trying to get out the door. Everyone's trying to get dressed. Everyone, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, do your hair. Why are you still naked? We're walking out the door. Oh my gosh, so it's so sometimes, some days it happens more quickly, but the whole point is you spend your whole day giving of yourself. And what Michael was trying to say, starting on Friday night and then again this morning, what's your source of life? If this is your source of life, right, then you're going to be running empty for a long time, right? Because not all the time does it come back. Michael he's the director of RCIA and Adult Faith at St. Anthony's, and so we just had the Easter Vigil. If anyone's ever helped with RCIA ever in your entire life, or you went through the RCIA process, you know that it's very time-consuming. And so for the director, it's even more time-consuming because he's doing all the behind-the-scenes work of paperwork and all that stuff. So, there were a lot of days that, I gave a lot to him and nothing was coming back. And not because, anything was going wrong, but just because he came home and he was spent. But if I gave to him with the expectation that he was going to give right back to me, with this, we would have never made it through Lent. It would have been day 2, and we've been like, and it's done, So I'm grateful for that. So my source of life, it took me a journey, but I feel very safe to say that my source of life does not come from any of these people. I'm not seeking the approval of my parents all the time. I'm not, my siblings, like, there are days that we want to kill each other, and then there are days that I couldn't, I'm so grateful that they're in my life, and there's a lot of them, so it's like I'm really grateful. I have to be really grateful, But if I relied on that to always get back, then I would, my jar would always be empty. But the point is at the end of the day, my jug gets refilled because my source of life goes back to He who created everything. I'm going to share a little story because I want to focus really on this class right here, on our spouses. All of this stuff, some of it is important, some of it is not important. It's not important necessarily. It's important for you at your job that your boss thinks that you do a good job, that you're getting paid to do something, that you respect that and you honor that and you do what it is that you should be doing. But at the end of the day, it's between your boss and your family, right? It's got to be your family, right? It doesn't matter what your boss says. So some of the stuff I struggle with this, you have to let it go. You have to let it go, let it be gone, and just let it be done. But with your spouse, right? This can be a challenge because they're with you all the time, right? Like, you pour and pour and pour and pour and pour into them. And sometimes they pour back, sometimes they don't. And if you're constantly looking for that, to reciprocate every single day in the same amount, I know people who tally, right? Like, I have friends who, if she goes and buys something for like $32.48, that means he can go spend $32.48 on whatever he wants. And I'm like, I don't really like that mentality because it's like a tit for tat, right? Like, I did this, so now I get to do that, So it's like, I don't really like that mentality because I feel like then it can overflow into other things, right? I don't do the laundry because I do kind of like doing laundry. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I'm weird like that. Okay, it's very soothing for me. Colors, folding, putting everything away. I love the smell of Tide. It's like heaven. Okay, maybe a little bit here and there. So sorry if anybody's anti-Tide, but anyways, they're not paying me for this. But I don't do it because I'm expecting everyone to be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for doing my laundry. This is so great. All my socks are together. All my underwear is folded. No, especially with my kids, half the time I go into the room and it's everywhere. Already at their age, you're like, can we not find a drawer? Can you not find, no? Okay, whatever. And then it's all mixed up. And Cecilia's coming out and things are falling off because it's really Katiri's. And Katiri's like, something's wrong with this shirt because it's cropped up. And we don't do crop tops in our house. You're like, that's because it belongs to somebody else. So anyways, I don't do those things to seek that affirmation. I do these things because genuinely I love them and I believe that these people that are in my life are gifts, okay? And I was very blessed at a young age to have a great example of what it means to give without expectation, to give without the anticipation that you were going to get something in return. Sorry, I'm working on major allergies here. Okay, so some of you, if you've ever been to Life Team back in the day, you might have heard a little bit about this story, but it's about my grandparents, okay? I'm very lucky that I got to know all 4 of my grandparents. 3 of them are still kicking to this day, so I feel like that's just a huge gift. But my dad's parents, his mom and dad, when I was 7 years old, my grandma got diagnosed with ALS, otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. And I know last year that big Ice Bucket Challenge went around and everybody was doing it, and I often wondered, does anybody know really what ALS is or why they're doing it, or are they just doing it to be funny or to get on that, Ice Bucket Challenge is going wrong, real, and just floating around, But ALS is a horrific disease. There's no cure. There are no real treatments. And for whatever reason, the motor neurons that go from your brain to your muscles to tell them what to do, they just degenerate and die. So basically what happens, any muscle that you have in your body just starts to shrivel up and you're unable to use them. It's a rather quick disease. On average, you can live 3 to 5 years. For whatever reason, my grandma lived 8. She blew everyone out of the water. It's awesome. And in the beginning of her diagnosis, we were also trying to wrap our brains around what it really meant, that she got diagnosed with this thing. And I was young, so I'm my grandma's sick. Okay, I don't know what that means, but she's grandma, so technically that means she's old. So is this a big deal, right? But then over the progression of her illness, like I started to pick up on things. She was always happy. She was always happy beforehand. She was one of those people that when you think of like your typical grandma, like always smiling, always happy, so excited to see us, welcoming people into her home, like just very generous. She was the light of her community, involved in her church. Like she just was like a light in her community. And my grandpa is an awesome guy. And then you always have to think, like, if he married such an incredible woman, like, he had to have been an incredible man, right? Even if he didn't necessarily show his emotions all the time, like, he's very stoic. He's like my own dad, where you're like, you kind of one hand, like, the amount of times I've seen my father get emotional, about things, but it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. It just means, like, that's just who he is. But, so my grandma is this outward loving, my grandpa had to have been at least somewhere close to that, on par with her, because they were together. And they weren't just together to be together. They really were in love with one another. And one of the greatest things that I got to witness is through the progression of her illness, I got to watch, I didn't so much watch her, I watched him care for her. So in the beginning, I remember at her retirement party, she already couldn't use her fingers. It's like she was trying to open an envelope and someone had to open it for her. She lost her ability to speak rather quickly, but he knew her, so she would try to say something and we couldn't understand. He'd be like, oh, she's saying this, and so he would do that. She was really big. She had this beautiful garden in her backyard, beautiful, and she tended to it every day. I mean, she's got the greenest thumb of anybody I've ever met. I can't keep a petunia alive to save my life, and those things are pretty indestructible, right? Like, I planted some a couple weeks ago, and they're like already dying. You're like, why? Like, what am I doing wrong? Okay, she just had this gift, and it was a joy for her. Not necessarily for him, it wasn't his hobby, but when she was unable to do it anymore, he kept it up. Like, he went to the garden every day. He weeded, he watered, he planted, like, he did all of this stuff. Not because all of a sudden he had a new love for flowers, like, he did it because he loved his wife. And he knew that that would bring her joy. Eventually, she wasn't able to go up and down the stairs, so he built their room, was on the second floor, so he built her an addition onto their house, all French bay windows, so that she could still enjoy her garden, right? So that every day she could sit in that room and watch him tend her garden. She could see the flowers growing. She could still be a part of all that, Even in like the really dark times, like where I would feel like dark, where she was like really couldn't do much. She just sat there, but she couldn't talk. She had a feeding tube, so she wasn't eating. She just sat there. I remember my grandpa like shimmied her into the room and sat her down. And then she looked at him, and he was like, oh, hell, Peggy. She had to go to the bathroom. So they were back up. But they were like giggling. So here's this woman who like could hardly speak. And they were like having this moment where they're giggling as they're doing this like cha-cha to the bathroom, after working her all the way, down, from wherever she was before. And I just remember being like, that's incredible that like, here's this situation that to a lot of people is devastating, right? But somehow there's still joy, like overflowing. And I got to thinking, like, where is this coming from, And he just did so much for her. The last 2 weeks of her life, she spent in a hospital, and she was on morphine, and so she was kind of in and out of things, and she was in a lot of pain. And I only went one time to see her, mostly because at that time I was a sophomore in high school, so we couldn't go every day. But when I did go, my grandpa was sitting next to her, and apparently that was his spot for those 2 weeks. He never left her side. And whenever she would wake up, he would get in her face, and I remember he like held her, like her head in his hands. Like he would like, I grab my kids, I'm like, loving on them or something. And he just would look at her, and he didn't see what I saw. Like I looked at my grandma, and I was like, you could end this anytime, Jesus. Like, enough is enough. Like, what more can this woman, what can you take from her? Like, she can't speak, she can't sit up, she can't eat, she can't breathe. Like, she's awful, And then she woke up, and she looked at my grandpa, and he held her head in his hands, and he was like, Peggy, I love you. It's okay. I'm here. It was such, should tell the story pregnant. Anyways, this was 20 years ago, so this is like a moment that is like forever ingrained in my mind. I was like, that was such a gift, and to this day I can't get it out. And my grandpa is died that day. Like, he's just waiting to be called. But every time he goes to the doctor, they're like, Ronan, you've got another 20 years. He's so funny, but I can never forget that. And I remember at her funeral, like that's the only time I've ever seen my grandpa weep, ever, was at her funeral when they closed the casket and he was really saying goodbye. I just remember being like, Lord, like, I want to love like that. Like, I want to love and I want to be loved like that. And you know what he said to me? He said, you already are. You already are. And he says, in the first letter of John, it said, the first letter, he said, we love because he first loved us. So at that moment, I was already being loved that intensely. I had already been bought. He had already died for me. He had already given his life so that I can get to heaven someday. And it was such a profound moment. I was like, oh my gosh. And then, you know, like later, as these past 20 years, I always reflect on this. Like, my grandpa's source of life was not any of this. He didn't give, you know, he didn't do all this stuff to his wife just because he felt like he had to, or because, you know, he was getting this great tax return on this, you know, like eco-friendly edition, and, you know, like he wasn't doing any of that. You know, he did it because he was being fed from somewhere else, and he just was giving because he just loved. He just loved without ceasing. And so that began my prayer life, so that I could find someday my spouse would love me the same way, that in my worst of worst, he would still look at me and say, it's okay, I love you, I'm here. And there would never be a doubt that he would ever walk away or leave when things got tough. Right? And I like to think that I found it. Took us a while to get to that point. About 6 months before we got engaged, we actually broke up. And I remember being really bitter because I really, like, I felt this. I'm remembering, which is bad. Like, I should never have put our relationship on the level of, like, my grandma and grandpa, you know? You're like, no one can measure up to that, right? That was them. That was their story. That was their love. Like, that was their, you know, like, their vocation, their mission in life. But, you know, but I was like, I love you that much that, you know, like, if you lost an arm, I would still be okay with that, you know, like, might have to discuss some things, but, no, I'm just kidding. But, you know, like, I loved him so much, and I believed full-heartedly that God had given him to me. And when I finally laid it all on the table after, it was 6 years of dating, so it wasn't like, you know, like, within a month, I was like, listen, buddy, you know, it was a long time. I'm like, there are no more restaurants, there are no more movies, I don't want to do any of that stuff anymore. Like, I want a life, like, I want this to be forever. And he told me no, and I immediately became angry. Like, I was so angry, so frustrated that I spent the next 6 months walking around with my heart, offering it to whoever would take it. Like, fix it. You can take it, you can fix it, you can take it, you can fix it. I even went home to my parents, right, because I'm a girl, and when no one else can fix it, your mom can, right? Because that's like what she's done her entire life. Like, and I went home with my heart, and I was like, Mom, you have to fix this. I'm tired of feeling this way. Like, I, you know, like, was so convinced. And then there was a death, and a good friend of theirs, a little girl died, so my parents had to go out of town for a funeral. So then I had to get called up to, like, take care of the younger siblings at home, even though I didn't even live in St. Louis anymore. So it was like this dramatic, like, change of events. You're like, Lord, like, I have nothing left. And he reminded me, he's like, yes, you do, because I loved you first. I loved you first. I am your source of life, not any of these other people. Not Michael, not your parents, not your job, not Father Drew, not anybody. Father Drew thinks he's my source of life, so again, that's just so he's like, I am your source of life. You love because I love you. And I love you without ceasing. I don't care what you've done. I don't care what has happened. What I care about is now, like, will you let me love you? And I'm like, you can't love me because I'm angry at you, because I've messed up, I've done this, I've done that. And he's like, I love you. I already love you. My love is unconditional. It's not based on any of that stuff. If you tell me right now that you love me, we're good. We're good. And so I took a deep breath, and I'm like, I gotta have something, because I gotta so my parents can go, bury their friend's little girl. So it was a very important moment. And then it was amazing over the next couple of months, like the things that happened in my life, because I let go. I knew that, it wasn't about me anymore. Eventually Michael came back, and it was good. We just got engaged because we stink at dating, so we just thought, we'll try this marriage bit and hopefully that'll work out better. I think it did. So I don't recommend that for everybody. I don't tell that to young people. So it's not something, but we did. But it was only because I had forgotten where I got my source from. In my relationship with Michael in the beginning, it was good. But then I really kind of put all my eggs in one basket. I started to, I'm from St. Louis. I moved to Houston, not because of the weather, not because it's the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my entire life. But I moved here for him. It was on the map because he was here, right? And I really wanted us to have a future. And it wasn't like I was some flighty girl just following a boy across the country. Like I felt called to it, And the Lord was providing things all the way. It's how I found St. Lawrence, right? And I love St. Lawrence. Like I remember calling my parents after a job interview, and I said, I don't care if I get this job or not. Do you realize places like this don't exist everywhere? Like, people like being Catholic. Like, people love their faith. People are passionate. People want to be here. They want to learn about Jesus. Like, the Spirit is alive. And that doesn't happen. I've been to churches where you're like, oh my gosh. Like, and do we even have a tabernacle? Like, is Jesus on site? Because I don't think he is, right? And so just to find a place like that, I'm like, that was just like, that's where I felt like you're saying, like, I'm going to take care of you. There are, like, I have a plan. Then I got offered the job, and I didn't hesitate to say yes, because I felt like I was like, I've been down to say no. Like, this is what I've been looking for in a parish, in a job, in a community, right? And I found it all in one spot. And it was a bonus that it was close to him. Over the next couple of years, I kind of like we all do, we get comfortable, right? We just kind of stay in this, like, state where you're like, oh, everything's good, so I'm just not going to rock the boat. Like, I wasn't going to challenge myself. I didn't pray for humility. I didn't pray for patience, right? Because it's bad. It can be rough when you start praying for those things, because you will get them in large doses. And I feel like I get them enough just being me. So I was like, yep, but we're just going to ride this or whatever. But the problem is that then everything that went wrong in my life came back to Michael. Everything that went wrong was like, I moved here for you. Like, I gave up my family, my life. I did that already. And I was like, I didn't ask you to. I'm like, what are you trying to say? But he was right. Like, it got cloudy there for a while, where I felt like I was still doing what God was asking me to do, but at the same time, too, I was looking for the return, on the other side of things. I'm like, I'm waiting for that to come back to me, and it wasn't going to happen. So we broke up, things ended, and I really thought, okay, well, that's it. Now what do I do? And now I'm so confused and I'm so lost. And it wasn't until I went back to my source of life that everything started to come back together. And it wasn't that I was, we didn't get back together because of this. Like, I didn't know that was going to happen. I really thought that was done. I really thought that part of my life was over, but I just felt this peace that I'm like, all right, like, he's taking care of me up to this point. Why do I keep doubting him? Why do I keep questioning? I'm the queen of planning. When I was working, everyone else had like their tablets, and I had that big old like black binder calendar thing, right? Color-coded, posted, noted, like it was beautiful. It was a work of art. Heaven forbid you touch it, because then we would die. But so that's how I was, and I would do it. I would be like, Lord, like, look at isn't this so awesome? Like, look at all this stuff I'm doing. And there were so many times he took it and he threw it away, and you're like, well, that was some good stuff in there, And he's like, but that's not what I'm asking you to do, right? I'm not asking for the pretty, perfect planned life. I'm asking for you to be reckless. I'm asking for you just to trust me, right? And that's always hard, because it means the unknown. And in our relationships now, I feel very blessed. I feel like I kind of got this out of our system before we were married, because I felt like then when we came to our marriage, like he talks about the baggage and stuff like that, we had dropped it. Like we had, recognized it, we had seen it, and we had moved forward, right? So that when we got married, it really was like, this was the beginning of the next chapter of our lives, and it was us, like purely just us, centered around God, Other people I've known, they get married and then this stuff happens later on in life, but it's because we forget along the way of where our source of life comes. And we forget, we get caught up in our kids. Like I've known people that kids come into the picture and their spouse, like they kind of becomes like a second thought, like an afterthought, right? Which is, I'm like, whenever Michael travels, he travels a lot, I'm always like, this family does not function without you, right? Like, he's not an afterthought, he's like the first thought. You're like, when are you coming home? When does the plane land? So he'll be home at 6:42, like, so that I can't do this by myself. I'm not made to do this by myself. Like, I need him, like, the kids need him, so I'm like, we have to do this together. But so many times in our lives, in our married lives, we don't. Right? Our spouse just becomes this hired help or this other half that, pays the bills or, like, well, the last 3 nights I got up with the kids, so tonight's your night, I'm sleeping, right? You're like, that's not, right? That's not how it works. Some nights, yes, we get to that point where we're like, if I don't sleep, everyone's going to die. Right? And they're like, yes. I got it, But I don't sometimes have to say that, right? Sometimes he just picks up on it or whatever, because as much as I'm pouring into him, he's pouring into me, but it's not necessarily every day the exact amount, right? It's because this is life, right? But because we're going back and we're getting filled in the right places so that we can give, because everyone has highs and lows in their lives, and they're not always at the same time, right? I remember, this is just a funny random story. So we were still newly married, we got pregnant with kids. We were told we couldn't have kids. And then 3 months later, we got pregnant. So you're like, well, I think you were wrong. But anyways, and like the hormone thing was like, oh my gosh. Like I'd never experienced anything like that. Michael is the baby of his family, so he clearly never had any experience with that. And I remember one day, like he left for work, and we lived in Austin, and we lived at the church. So to go to work, he just had to cross the parking lot. So he left, and I started making the bed, and I was like enraged. Like, I just felt like my blood boiling, and I literally didn't explode. I'm like making the bed, I'm throwing the pillows on the bed, and I am so irritated, right? It's only 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm like bloodthirsty, right? And this has never happened before in my life. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then Michael comes home for lunch, and he's like, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, he's like, oh my gosh. And so he like finally sits down, and he's like eating his lunch. He has no idea what to do. He has no idea why he's mad. I don't even know why I'm mad. So even if he were to ask me, I'd be like, I have no idea. Just start talking, And then he left, and he was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to work now. And he like tiptoed out the door, like closed it gently. And then like an hour later, it like left. I was like, what the heck was that? I have no idea what that was. And then I'm like, I felt really bad because I was really mean for no apparent reason, none whatsoever. Like, oh my gosh. So then I'm like, I went back to the store, I made an uber nice dinner, like set the table. I was like, and he comes home at 5:30, and he's like, and I'm like, hi. And he's like, and so in his mind, I can just imagine he's like, okay, now we're good again. No idea what that was about, And then afterwards, I just apologized. I have no idea what happened. He was like, me neither. And he goes, I just spent the whole time trying to think. He's like, what did I do wrong? Nothing. And then we laughed about it. But it's at those moments that I appreciate that, like, we don't rely on each other to feed each other, right? Because I was nuts. And I still don't know. At least now, like, 4 kids in, like, he kind of expected. Like, he walks in, he's like, sees that look, and he's just gonna take the kids and go downstairs, maybe outside, around the block, to grandma's house, whatever, like in for a moment, and I'll be fine, But, like it's at moments like that, you're so grateful that, like we can just give and receive whenever it's necessary, right? Like that it's not like he's not expecting me to like, he's just not expecting everything of me because our source of life is something else. Our replenishment comes from outside of each other. And so those things like that, I'm very grateful. And I'd also just kind of hopefully reaffirms that, like this is going to stick. We're almost 6 years in. I think we're going to, open for at least 6 more. And then maybe not 6 more kids, but at least 6 more years. And I'm grateful for that. And I just want to end really fast. Not really fast. I'm sorry. It's like 4 minutes till lunch. I knew I was getting hungry. The hungry monster was coming out. What I just want to end with here is that if you are looking at your spouse for your everything, if you're looking at them for constant affirmation, or like if you have a tally of like, well, this week I did this, last week I did that, when did you do this, or if you have made your spouse your source of life, I would like you to fire them right now, okay? You can do it verbally later, but just in your mind, prepare yourselves to look at your spouse and say, I fire you. You are fired. You are not my source of life. You are not. My source of life is greater. My source of life loved me before I was even here. He loved me so much that he created me. Right? You exist because he loves you. If he ever stopped loving you, you would cease to exist. And I'm not just saying that you'll die. We will have no recollection that you ever walked the face of the earth. That's how intense his love is for us. That he has loved us into being. He has loved us into existence. And our existence will go far beyond even when our bodies leave this earth. Right? When we go into the ground and our souls move on. My grandma, it's been 20 years since she died. And it's like she's still here. And not because she, cured some disease or moved mountains, but simply because she lived the mission he created her for. And she lived it beautifully. She did. And my grandpa lived it beautifully with her. And even to this day, we still get caught in these moments where we're like, oh, Peggy. Right? And we all just kind of stop because it's like, right? But that's incredible because she was so loved by us, but first by him. And he loves us the same, and he wants us, just wants us, with everything that we've got, all the good, the bad, right? Every shape, size, color, form, whatever. He doesn't care. He just wants us. So let him love you. And then I opened up with that reading that you hear a lot. I don't think you hear, we had it at our wedding because we're like that, like, be submissive. But the things about this scripture that I love is because it says, it reminds us that not just to be submissive, but to love like Christ loved his church, right? And he loved us so much that he did that. Right, so that's our example of love. Our love that he wants to love us, and then the love that we should share with one another. And if we do that, start little by little, firing each other for being the source of life, your marriage will radically change, and your family will radically change. Right? People might look at you weird, but it doesn't matter because your love is this. And there's nothing better. Nothing. All right. Heavenly Father, we praise you and thank you for this time. We thank you for each other, for the gift of the sacrament of marriage. We thank you for the gift of our spouses. Lord, we ask you to bless us for many, many, many years together here on this earth. We ask you to bless all of our children and to help us, remind us daily that you are the center of our lives, that you are our source of life. And that once we allow you to love us, who loved us first, how that love will overflow and radiate throughout us. And we ask this all in your name. Amen. Amen. Thank you all.